In the book of Kings, 2 Kings 6, the Bible describes how God provides an army of angels leading horses and chariots of fire to protect the prophet Elisha and his servant, and opens the servant's eyes so that he can see the angelic army surrounding them. Elisha, the plowman, succeeded Elijah in the prophetic role. He asked Elijah for a double portion of his spirit, a phrase that is frequently misunderstood. It does not mean that he wanted to be twice the prophet Elijah had been. It was actually a phrase taken from the inheritance customs. If a man had 4 sons, his estate was divided into 5 when he died, and the double portion went to the eldest son, who became the heir of the family business, with the extra money to help with the responsibility. In asking for a double portion of Elijah's spirit, Elisha was asking to be his heir and successor, to be allowed to take over the business. Let us set the scene. Ancient Aram, now Syria, was at war with Israel, and the king of Aram was troubled that the prophet Elisha was able to predict where his army was intending to go, warning Israel's king so that he could develop Israel's army's strategy. The king of Aram decided to send a massive army of soldiers to the city of Dothan to capture God's prophet Elisha so that he wouldn't be able to help Israel win the war. 2 Kings 6, 8-10. Now the king of Aram was at war with Israel. After conferring with his officers, he said, "I will set up my camp in such and such a place." The man of God sent word to the king of Israel, "Beware of passing that place, because the Arameans are going down there." So, the king of Israel checked on the place indicated by the man of God. Time and again, Elisha warned the king, so that he was on his guard in such places. Prophetic messages were often sought and/or offered in the ancient Near East in relation to military campaigns. Prophetic messages were subjected to testing by other, more common means of divine communication. The Assyrian royal inscriptions mention kings receiving oracles during battles. Because the Arameans were referred to as raiders, this was most likely not a full-fledged war, but it was still a serious incursion. Despite their adversaries' superior forces, Elisha had access to divine intelligence about Aram's king's schemes. The ruler couldn't make even the most rudimentary plan in his tent without Elisha relaying it to the king of Israel in detail, so that he could take appropriate countermeasures. This enraged the king of Aram. He summoned his officers and demanded of them, "Tell me, which of us is on the side of the king of Israel?" "None of us, my lord the king," said one of his officers. But Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom. "Go, find out where he is," the king ordered, "so I can send men and capture him." The report came back. "He is in Dothan." Then he sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night and surrounded the city. Nothing is hidden from God. He knew all the movements of Israel's enemies. Israel's enemies may have secretly plotted to harm them, but God protected them. Listening to Yahweh's prophet was a wise decision on the part of Israel's king. But Elisha informed Israel's king of the Aramean king's movements. It not only demonstrated Yahweh's power on his behalf, but it also demonstrated to the Aramean king that Yahweh was Israel's protector. God's blessing on his people was both a kindness to them and a witness to others about who Yahweh is. The Lord revealed a lot of the enemy's plans to Elisha that the king of Aram became so upset that he accused his servants of harboring a spy for Israel in verse 11. And when he learned that Elisha, the prophet in Israel, was the source of his problems, the king sent horses, chariots, and a massive army to capture him. However, because this was the same prophet who had healed the commander of Aram's army, he would not be so easily apprehended. 2 Kings 5, 8-10. When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message: "Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, "Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed." 2 Kings 6, 15-16. When the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. "Oh no, my lord, what shall we do?" the servant asked. "Don't be afraid," the prophet answered. "Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." When Elisha's servant saw the horde of enemy forces encircling their city, he cried out, "Oh, my master, what are we to do?" But Elisha was unconcerned. He saw with faith-filled eyes and declared, "Those who are with us outnumber those who are with them." His assurance here is reminiscent of the Apostle John's exhortation to believers. "The one who is in you is greater than the one who is in the world." 1 John 4:4. When we align with God, our adversary is always outnumbered. And Elisha prayed, "Open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see." Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. 2 Kings 6:17. When God's servants are doing his will and doing his work, they are invincible until the task is completed. The disciples tried to persuade Jesus not to return to Judah, but he assured them that he was on a divine timetable and thus perfectly safe. John 11:7-10. Then after this he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, lately the Jews sought to stone you, and are you going there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if one walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him." As the enemy came down toward him, Elisha prayed to the Lord, "Strike this army with blindness." So he struck them with blindness, as Elisha had asked. Elisha told them, "This is not the road, and this is not the city. Follow me, and I will lead you to the man you are looking for." And he led them to Samaria. After they entered the city, Elisha said, "Lord, open the eyes of these men so they can see." Then the Lord opened their eyes, and they looked, and there they were, inside Samaria. When the king of Israel saw them, he asked Elisha, "Shall I kill them, my father? Shall I kill them?" "Do not kill them," he answered. "Would you kill those you have captured with your own sword or bow? Set food and water before them so that they may eat and drink, and then go back to their master." So he prepared a great feast for them, and after they had finished eating and drinking, he sent them away, and they returned to their master. So the bands from Aram stopped raiding Israel's territory. 2 Kings 6:17-23. The enemy, the Aramean king, reasoned that the best way to destroy God's people was to eliminate God's prophet. So the Aramean king dispatched a large army of horses and chariots to capture Elisha during the night. When Elisha's assistant looked out the window the next morning, he saw the Arameans circling the city and became terrified. He asked Elisha what they should do, and Elisha replied, "Do not be afraid, because those on our side outnumber those on the enemy's side." Then Elisha prayed to the Lord to open his assistant's eyes, and the mountains were suddenly covered with horses and fiery chariots. They were being guarded by a greater force. Just because the servant couldn't see them at first didn't mean they weren't there. He needed God to open his eyes to see what had always been there. When the Arameans approached, Elisha prayed to God to blind them, and God granted his request. Elisha then brought them to Israel's king in Samaria. The king desired to execute them, but they were not the king's prisoners to execute. Their release was a sign of God's salvation for both Israel and Aram. Elisha's prayer was answered by the Lord, and his servant saw God's army. Elisha was surrounded by horses and chariots of fire. It was a wall of divine protection. Heavenly intervention even extended to blinding the enemy army and allowing Elisha to lead them right into Israel's camp. There, King Joram was so ecstatic about the prospect of a simple victory that he must have been jumping up and down like a child, yelling, "Should I kill them? Should I kill them, my father?" His regard for Elisha was strong, but it wouldn't last long. Elisha not only forbade the massacre, but he also ordered that a feast be prepared for them. As a result, the astounded Aramean raiders retreated from Israel. Can you imagine that? The power of God must have confused the enemy. They must have told their king that they were no match for the God of the Israelites. All glory was due to God. Centuries after God opened the eyes of Elisha's servant, the Apostle Paul wrote that we should prepare ourselves with God's protection. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, contending only with physical opponents, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly, supernatural places. Ephesians 6:12. That verse also reminds us that in spiritual warfare we have unseen allies. We may never be able to see God's protection in the same way that Elisha's servant did, but we can be assured that God is keeping an eye on us. God's faithfulness and love surround us. No matter how perilous life becomes, we can recall the words of Romans 8. Romans 8:35-39. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or peril, or sword? As it is written, for your sake we are killed all day long. We are accounted as sheep for the slaughter. Yet in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am persuaded that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other created thing shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. In this chapter, we see that God provides for the concerns of his people. Vision. Elisha helped others to see his divine perspective. How can a leader help an associate catch his vision? The story of Elisha and his servant gives us some clues. Elisha and his servant's story provides some hints. Elisha's example serves as a reminder of some fundamental truths about perspective. First, Elisha was unmoved by the physical realm and its adversaries. Second, Elisha displayed poise and assured his servant that he had nothing to fear. Third, Elisha communicated an invisible vision to others. Fourth, Elisha prayed for his servant to be able to see what he was seeing. More than any other characteristic, perspective distinguishes leaders from followers. Leaders see ahead of their followers. They see beyond what their followers see. And they see bigger than their followers. Jesus indirectly linked himself to Elisha through the nature of the miracles he performed. Jesus raised a boy from the dead in the village of Nain, next to Shemen, where Elisha had performed a similar miracle. He fed 5,000 people with bread and fish, mirroring Elisha's miracle in feeding the 100 with bread. When Jesus died, people came out of their graves, just as a dead man was revived after contact with Elisha's dead body.